Hello and welcome to City at a Glance. I'm Kelly DiMartino with the City of Fort Collins. Thanks for joining us. City at a Glance is a program where we can talk about issues and projects that are important here in the City of Fort Collins. As always, we're pleased to have joining us City Manager Darren Atterbury. Darren, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Today our topic is going to be the Northern Colorado Clean Energy Cluster, and so we're pleased to have the Executive Director of that organization, Judy Dorsey. Judy, welcome.
Thanks, Kelly.
Also joining us is Mike Freeman, who is the City of Fort Collins Chief Financial Officer and who also serves on the Board of Directors for the Clean Energy Cluster. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Darren, I'm going to ask you to start by just talking a little bit about why the Clean Energy Cluster is so important to the City of Fort Collins and how it fits in with our overall economic strategy.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'm really excited about this show. I think it's very, very relevant to this community. I think it's going to be a big part of our economic future. So I just have a couple things I want to talk about. I think that the subject matter that we're talking about today is a big part of the economic vision that the council established back in 2006-2007 timeframe. And clean energy is obviously one of our identified target economic cluster areas, and Judy and Mike are going to talk a lot about that. But it's not by accident that we're talking about this. It's by design. It's a very conscious, deliberate decision that we made to pursue this area. There's a great cluster of companies in Fort Collins and in northern Colorado in this area of clean energy. There's just a lot of talent and potential. So I'm really excited to hear more about it, and I do think it's a very relevant topic to Fort Collins.
So Mike, maybe if you can tell us just a little bit more about kind of how this got started in terms of the city's economic strategy and how it fits into that bigger picture.
Sure. Actually, I might have Judy talk about the origins of the Clean Energy Cluster, because that was actually before I joined the city. And then why don't I talk about once the idea took shape, what's really happened since then and how we've integrated it in, if that's all right.
Great.
Sure. So the cluster was officially launched in 2006, but it was after a one-year kind of forming process that began in 2005. And it kind of seemed to erupt simultaneously from various camps within the community, which was a good sign that it was meant to be. And a part out of the Fort Collins Area Chamber Environmental Committee, and also NCEDC helped to seed the initial meetings to convene the businesses in the cluster to see if they felt it was worth organizing and growing jobs in this realm. And likewise, the city's work and its economic policy. So after a one-year formation process, it launched in 2006 with our first initiative. And kind of what clusters aren't unique, obviously, and Mike will speak to other types of clusters in Fort Collins, but they're not, energy clusters aren't unique to Fort Collins and northern Colorado. The launch of the cluster in 2006, what differentiated us is a real focus on projects and initiatives. So we launched with our first initiative in 2006, which was the precursor to the Integrid Lab at CSU, Engines and Energy Conversion Lab. So we launched with that and been up and running since. We formally incorporated as a nonprofit in 2009.
Okay, so for people, you've mentioned that, we've used the word cluster a lot, but for people who aren't really even familiar with that structure or what it means, what does it mean to have a cluster, and why does it matter?
There's a professor at Harvard, his name is Michael Porter, and he has spent his career studying regional economies, and one of the things he found in areas where there's a tremendous number of firms and a high concentration of employees and also high wages, that over time, that basically kind of a network grows up. And what that network looks like, which he calls a cluster, is the intersection of the private sector, government, and I say that generally could include city, county, state, federal, and then higher education. And so what that looks like here is that Colorado State, for example, has a long history in terms of attracting significant resources and faculty and students in energy. So they've had a very long-standing focus in water and biosciences and energy for quite some time. And that in turn has partly supported the private sector, which has partly then in turn supported this concentration of companies that have grown up around a variety of technologies which aren't hugely important. So the cluster concept just basically means an interrelationship between the public-private in the higher education sectors. And they're extremely valuable because these clusters, once they're up and running, create a lot of synergy in terms of creating new jobs, in terms of creating competition that makes all the companies stronger, in terms of attracting like kinds of firms and support firms to an area that again are consistent with that that overall mission. And so we're very fortunate in Fort Collins to actually have several of these industry groups. One happens to be in energy, and clean energy in particular, but also in biosciences and specifically in infectious disease and animal science. Also in software, and a strong concentration of companies that do what's called geographic information systems, and that actually is directly ties back to CSU. And then we also have an emerging set of companies in the water technology area. And what I mean by that is the kind of the whole treatment process around clean water and managing clean water and the resources. And so those really are kind of our platform from a regional standpoint around kind of high quality jobs. And that's why that's important, is to, to focus on those and try to help those existing companies stay here, try to grow new ones where we can, and then where it makes sense, do business attraction in those target industry groups.
Okay, thank you. So, Judy, as you mentioned, projects being one of the things that's unique about how our cluster really kind of launched here in Fort Collins. Let's talk about what are some of those projects and give people a flavor for the type of work that's coming out of the Clean Energy Cluster.
Mm-hmm. Well, Fort Zed is probably the most noted initiative of the Clean Energy Cluster, and that's a three-way partnership between the Clean Energy Cluster, Fort Collins Utilities, and University Connections through the Community Foundation. And that initiative has several sub-projects that you may have also heard about. The Renewable and Distributed Systems Integration Project, which really just rolls right off the tongue. So we call it the Jump Start to Fort Zed. Fort Zed on total is about a 50 megawatt district. So this Jump Start zone is kind of proving that out. With approximately 3 megawatts of distributed assets. And New Belgium Brewing, for example, is participating in that project with a number of different renewable energy technologies, including solar. So Fort Zed is one, and it has many projects underneath, and I'm happy to tell you more about that. But another, which is really exciting, that Mike and I have been working on this spring, is the International Clean Tech Network. And the idea is, if you have all these clusters, what if you were to take the highest performing ones on an international level and grow them together as a network? Because if you look at the businesses in the Northern Colorado Clean Energy Cluster, most of them are global companies. If you look at Woodward, for example, and where their operations are, even Spray and Smart Grid and their work launching out of Denmark as an example, we have global players. And so if the network works here, what if we grow that network internationally? So we have two co-founders of the International Clean Tech Network, ourselves in Copenhagen capacity out of Denmark, and we're in the process of researching and benchmarking and recruiting the highest performers throughout the world. We're kind of leading up North America, they're leading up Europe. And so that, I think, is pretty exciting. Fort Zed has drawn a lot of international attention, and so it kind of shows the interconnection between two of our initiatives.
To my next door neighbor, how will they benefit? I mean, they're excited about this kind of thing, but they don't really understand how it relates to the average citizen. Can you just, one of you maybe share a little bit about that?
Fort Zed is a district that covers the main campus of CSU, downtown Fort Collins, up through the Poudre River corridor at New Belgium. So it's coincided with the University Connections district, for those who are familiar with that. So that's about, depending on consumption or number of accounts, 10 to 15% of the entire city of Fort Collins. And it's roughly 7,000 electric accounts, 6,200 households. So a great distribution of our two largest industrial customers, with New Belgium and the university as the anchors. Small to medium-sized business, approximately 1,800, something like that, and then 6,000 homes.
And again, maybe just the very basics of it. Fort Zed is a zero energy district. Like, what's the goal of that project?
And if you can translate it to, why would the average person in Fort Collins, how would they benefit? I think I know the response, but I'm sort of asking because there are a lot of people who are watching this, very interested, but maybe can't make the translation.
It's kind of funny to ask an engineer who just immersed in this on why the next door neighbor should care, but I will.
Okay. Kelly will backfill.
Kelly will
She's an interpreter.
Everybody, your neighbor included, pays a monthly utility bill. We know that there's a high ethos around environmental impact and reducing impact in Fort Collins. We've seen that over and again in terms of participation by Fort Collins residents around progressive environmental programs. So, and the third thing is jobs. I hope that your neighbor isn't unemployed, but a lot of my neighbors have been hit with this recession. Fort Zed is a project that can help on all three of those fronts. Job growth, that's what the Clean Energy Cluster is about. We have a goal to grow 1,650 new jobs in the 5-year horizon, and we believe that Fort Zed is one of those high-profile, high-impact projects that can help do that. It's very consistent. Zero Energy District gets to energy supply through energy efficiency as the first strategy, and then local generation, including renewable resources. So it's very consistent with the city's electric supply policy and climate goals, which have been publicly vetted, so perhaps your neighbor may have participated in part of those efforts. Your neighbor may be very interested in university connections and growing communications between our university and our businesses and our area residents that are close to the university. And if they don't care about any of those things, they might like to know that they could reduce their energy bill at the end of the day. It's hard to make that direct translation with Fort Zed, but those are the things we're trying to prove out, is giving people more information to make choices on how and when they use energy.
Judy, just so you know, in this show, I oftentimes bring up my neighbor.
I know. Someday I really need to meet this neighbor.
Yeah, I have multiple neighbors, but it's really trying to translate to how it impacts the person down the street. I think that's
I see the tool time eyes over the fence.
Yeah, I understand. Mike, do you want to add?
Just one other perspective. Northern Colorado Clean Energy Cluster is going through a rebrand process right now, and part of that's because the organization has been evolving and growing, and is really, I think, emerging into a new identity, particularly with the international focus we're getting, which really wasn't an initial goal, if you will, of the Clean Energy Cluster per se. Fort Zed has put this area on the map, hands down, as a project, and I think there's a couple of issues around that I think that are positive. One, just in the last couple weeks, we had some very high-level utility executives from Japan that came to visit, and the only reason they came to Northern Colorado was they heard about Fort Zed, and we're not exactly sure how they even found out about that. And unfortunately, there's a delegation of Indian electric executives as well, the utility executives, I should say, that will also be coming, although their trip got postponed. But the number one issue why they're coming to Northern Colorado is to talk about Fort Zed. So I think that aligned with city utilities, with the Clean Energy Cluster, with the university, is putting us on the map as a very, very innovative, significant project. But the other part of it that I think is also important, and this came out in the conversation about what value the Clean Energy Cluster provides, frankly, to its members. One of those, and Darren, you and I briefly had a conversation about this because I kind of a light bulb went on for me, a bad pun here, but what the companies talked about in the rebrand was one of the most important things that the Clean Energy Cluster does is facilitates access to City of Fort Collins utilities to experiment, again, appropriately, new technologies, new thinking, and new ideas. And there are very few places globally where you can approach your local utility and be able to, in essence, play live in an operating environment. And that's what we're doing with this RDSI project that Judy mentioned. It's what we're doing with Intergrid Lab. And frankly, I think it's probably an area where we can continue to differentiate ourselves from an economic standpoint, longer term. So those are a couple other dimensions that I think probably aren't real obvious all the time to people, but are important.
Mm-hmm. The cluster is getting recognized for these efforts internationally, but also statewide. And so this spring, Mike went down and accepted on behalf of the cluster the Governor's Renewable Energy Award. And I think that was just really nice validation that an economic development organization like ours would receive the Renewable Energy Award for statewide efforts. And while I described what launched the cluster, and it came out of many camps, that the city of Fort Collins has, through Mike's leadership, has been very consistently a very strong proponent and supporter, not just on the board, but helping make these projects go. And so I wanted to thank, while we're here, I didn't want to miss that opportunity to thank the city, because we've come to discover in our benchmarking internationally about what are those high-performing clusters. You absolutely have to have a, they say triple helix. We're used to sustainability and triple bottom line, which triple bottom line plays out in the clean energy cluster, but triple helix, as Mike had said earlier, is private sector participation of a high functioning research institution and local government, public policy and public participation. And if any one of those is weak, you won't have a high performing cluster. And so I just want to really emphasize the role that the city has played, and also the recognition that we've gotten from the governor for our efforts.
Darren, this is kind of a theme we hear often, the importance of Colorado State University in our community. Could you just talk a little bit about that, their presence, and why it's so important, particularly to the cluster?
Well, it's great to take the opportunity to thank CSU for that partnership, starting at the top with President Tony Frank and going throughout. You know, CSU shapes who this community is, and some people say, well, it doesn't feel as much like a college town. It is. This is part of, Colorado State is part of our DNA, and they are helping in so many areas. This is just one great example, and I think you know, they have really helped our local economy also. The presence of the university has helped our local economy over these last few very tough years. In the area of research and development, they're critical. Many communities across the country would love to have a university of the caliber of Colorado State. So that's number one. I think it's also important to emphasize the role of Fort Collins Utilities as another public entity, as part of the city of Fort Collins. We have a great leader in Brian Janones, who understands the value and the role that these partnerships play, and I think has led the utilities in the last couple of years to be much, much more collaborative. And then the private sector, and you know, Judy, I know you have some comments you'd like to make about the private sector, but you know, you were very complimentary of Mike and the city previously. You've been a huge part of this, and your leadership, both as an individual and your company's role, but also just representing the private sector, I think has been fantastic. Can you share just your thoughts about the benefits of the private sector as well?
Absolutely, and thank you, by the way, for that comment. This kind of shows this helix in work in action, because you can't separate these. And the university, right, as an example, many of the entrepreneurs who started their businesses here graduated from CSU. Mm-hmm. I'm a case in point where I wanted to stay and work in my field. I had to go off to the national lab and work in energy research, and then come back and start my business with that experience in our belt. Spray, similarly. Sunil Cherian being a PhD out of CSU Mechanical Engineering Department. Those are two examples. If you look at the other businesses in the clean energy cluster, Woodward, 100-year-old billion-dollar company that has since moved their worldwide headquarters here to Fort Collins, so that was after the launch of the cluster. Advanced Energy, that's a great example of a home-based business that's doing well, it's thriving, and it's an example of expansion into clean energy with them rolling out their solar inverter, which is relatively recent relative to the launch of the cluster. Ice Energy is another member of the Clean Energy Cluster and serving on the board of directors. The Symbiose, which is in the incubator, and the incubator, the RMI, Rocky Mountain, I'm sure Mike will talk about RMI too, I say the incubator for short, but the growth of businesses in the incubator has had high representation from the clean energy sector, and Symbiose is another example of that serves on the board. Another great, interesting example, Ward Petroleum, Oklahoma-based company, again, linkage to CSU, student at CSU, whose family is now starting a renewable energy spin-out of Ward Petroleum here in northern Colorado, and picked northern Colorado in large part for what the cluster can offer. We have Telvent and Solix. Solix, again, another company incubated out of the university. And so those are, did I miss anybody on the Clean Energy Cluster board? I think it's a good example to show that linkage with the university and its importance towards fostering entrepreneurship and innovation in our region.
So I guess I just want to say, I think if you take just all the great companies, including yours that you just talked about, you couple that with a utility who wants to responsibly and very proactively partner and collaborate and be an industry leader, in their industry. And a world-class research institution like Colorado State makes for a cluster, right? Makes for a great environment for top-notch, world-class level research and development that just so happens to just may put Fort Collins on that map. And you've already said it has, but I think that translates well, or fits well with the vision of Fort Collins and, you know, the citizens who want this to be a innovative, world-class community. And so those partnerships are just really, really exciting.
One thing I think that defines, in a lot of respects, how the city of Fort Collins approaches economic health is through these partnerships. And so, for example, you know, the city of Fort Collins has been, at times, the sole supporter of our technology incubator, now has a new name, for years and years and years. I think the great thing is that we're small enough here where the coordination is extremely tight. So, for example, our My2's board, which I also sit on and represent the city, and one of the reasons I do that is so we can kind of cross-pollinate, if you will, concepts and ideas that need to be coordinated between entities and organizations. One of the things that was done this year specifically was the Clean Energy Cluster Board kind of officially acknowledged the Rocky Mountain Innovation Initiative, or RMI2 as it's known, as its incubation arm. And so we don't try to duplicate effort. We say, okay, you know, RMI2 as an organization is doing great. In the incubation side, RMI2 is also linked specifically to Colorado State through 2 board members that sit on that board. So that's a really important concept because we're not big enough, we don't have enough resources to duplicate effort. And so the coordination is not always perfect, as you'd imagine, but you know, by and large, I think it's outstanding. And that also includes all the efforts that go on at Colorado State. Dr. Bill Farland, for example, who's the executive vice president and oversees all the research and development for the university, sits on the RMI2 board. Mark Wadowik the same way. Wade Troxel, who's a council member and a professor in the engineering school, sits on the Clean Energy Cluster Board with a guy named Tim Reeser, who is the chief operating officer of Colorado State's Clean Energy Initiative. So you can see how everything's kind of linked together, and that's on purpose, so that we're pushing forward and progressing but not duplicating effort.
So as you look forward, there's a lot of great stuff going on already, and one of the things that strikes me is there's this, it seems like just great intellectual capital as you're talking about all of these things. Then there's the technology piece, and then kind of the structure that we've set up through the cluster to really have all of the synergy. So what sort of opportunities are most exciting as you look and say, wow, this is what Fort Collins is going to be able to do because of the Clean Energy Cluster or through the cluster?
So, and it kind of reminds me, I know Darren's a fan of Jim Collins and Good to Great and some of those principles, and it reminds me of this, we are experiencing the flywheel effect. We started in 2006. We have the Integrid Lab. Fort Z is an initiative. We have the Jumpstart Zone, the Smart Grid Investment Grant, and it really feels like we now have enough pieces to pull together. Then we have the critical mass to pull off an integrated, what we might call hybrid renewable energy project to help fulfill the generating needs around Fort Z, whether it's a mix between sizable solar, utility scale solar, and or wind. Those are some exciting things. The reason it's especially exciting is the companies that we just described. We have panels from Abound, we have inverters from Advanced Energy, we have Amped with power electronics and some of the controls that they could potentially do. We have Veersol as an integrator, which is a company also in RMI too. So we have an interesting mix of technologies that are created right here in Northern Colorado to showcase and then could be replicated in other districts around the world. So those are, to me, the most exciting parts right now. And if we didn't have that flywheel effect, we just could not ever conceive of actually being able to pull it off, but now it's very conceivable to me in the future.
The flywheel effect that Judy's talking about is getting this area on the map, and we're getting noticed. I mean, companies like Cisco and GE, you know, large companies, IBM, that have all kinds of different pieces and parts of not only clean energy and the networks and some of the devices themselves, but you know, those are the kind of companies that want to come and essentially kind of play, as a bad expression, but want to play here. They want to figure out how to plug into projects, initiatives that are here, and that's going to be, again, I think, good long term for this community to have, you know, some of these larger energy-based and well, geez, got all kinds of businesses, but I'm really thinking more about the GE Energy side, the finance side, you know, having some representation from a GE here, for example, or Cisco. And those are opportunities that are really legitimate now that even 3 or 4 years ago would not have happened and couldn't happen. So I think there's a good long-term possibility of bringing in some, you know, some companies with some very deep expertise, some very deep financial resources to really help us achieve local goals. And that's exciting. I'm not sure how that's going to play out yet, but we're just sort of at the beginning stages of that.
And as Judy said earlier, why that, at least from your perspective, why that may be important, because that helps create jobs. It helps us shape sort of energy policy. And then the third piece.
Economics, environment.
Environment, right.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, again, back to the next door neighbor who's saying, why would we want our local government doing these kinds of things? I mean, depending on your perspective, any one of those three, or for some of us, all three, are really important. And I think what I love about it is that we're helping shape, we're helping, you know, at a city level, as a regional level, helping shape potentially, you know, our energy future. And that's a huge deal, not at the expense of our local customer. Actually, it's to the benefit, and that's pretty exciting.
Well, so much going on, and definitely more that people can learn, but at least this has given them a sampling of the things that are out there and the work that you're all doing, so thank you very much for that. Mike, as we wrap up, any closing comments?
Well, just real quick, for more information, we have a great website. It has a lot of information about the Clean Energy Cluster on it. It's fcgov.com/business. Really encourage people to go there. You can get a link to the Clean Energy Cluster, to the FortSet website, among other things. So that'll be a great way to get more information if people are looking.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Judy, any final thoughts?
I think the final, kind of building off Darren's comments that we didn't otherwise get to mention, is an interest in the World Climate Solutions Conference this year in Denmark, and there's a growing interest in having a presentation about Fort Zed, especially from the community kind of development standpoint, not just the economic development angle. So stay tuned on that. We're hopeful to hear more conclusive down the road, but it's just a nice nod to the efforts that Fort Zed and the Clean Energy Cluster are you know, creating some solutions here at the community level that are of interest around the world.
Great, thank you. Thanks for being here. Darren?
Yeah, you know, this show, like many others, is really emphasizing partnerships. And we can do some things alone, and that is good, but we're so much better with partnering, in this case, with the private sector and with Colorado State and others. And I just, it's a sort of a common theme on these shows, Kelly. I think the other thing is the okay to establish a vision. And frankly, one group we haven't mentioned throughout this whole discussion is the role of a mayor and a council. Early on, we had a mayor and a council who have a vision, or that say, let's empower these groups to leverage each other's strengths and build on that, and let's see what it builds. And so I think about, you know, as final comments, I think about vision, I think about empowering, I think about partnerships and collaboration, and each one of us brings different benefits to the table. Some bring intellectual capital, some bring systems, some bring the ability to research or connections, and I like that, and I really appreciate really the two of you individually, your work in this area, because I think it's been impactful. But I also appreciate the partnerships that you bring in in this table today as well. I think it's a big deal. So appreciate it, Kelly.
Great, thanks, Darren. With that concludes this edition of City at a Glance. Thanks for joining us.